Some analysis now on the events of the week with Paul Kelly, editor-at-large at the Australian. And Paul, the Cardinal said that his trial was not a referendum on the Catholic Church. However, as you wrote in the Australian yesterday, his case was entangled with the sins of the Church, wasn't it?
I think that's the heart of the great dilemma with the Pell saga, Kieran. This story is a tragedy for people, and a fiasco for the Victorian criminal justice system. And the point to make here is that there are no winners. Pell has been damaged, and the complainant must clearly have been damaged given what he was put through over the last several years. Pell was charged with child sexual abuse, and under the law, of course, the only issue should have been whether he was guilty or innocent of those charges. But the context here was all important. Pell was the leader of the Catholic Church and had been a very prominent figure in the Church over decades, during which the unforgivable criminal behaviour of the Church in relation to child sexual abuse was conducted and then revealed by the Royal Commission. So going into the trial, there was always the question, could Pell get a fair trial? Was this just about guilt or innocence, or was there a community sentiment that he deserved to be punished because of the sins of the Church? Now, we know the answer to that, given the 7-0 High Court decision. This was not a decision based on a legal technicality. It was a comprehensive rejection of the jury decision and the decision by the Victorian Court of Appeal. So the conclusion from the High Court is that George Pell did not get a fair trial, that he was wrongly convicted and wrongly imprisoned. And this goes to the question of the institutions in Victoria and the criminal justice system in Victoria.
So what hope is there of reform of those very institutions, given, as you've said and others have agreed with you, that there wasn't a fair trial afforded the Cardinal?
That's a really difficult assessment to make, and one imagines from the very early signs that there are going to be a lot of denial about this coming from Victoria. Now, the facts of the matter here are, Kieran, that Pell only got a fair trial when this was taken out of the hands of the Victorian justice system. He only got a fair trial when it went to the High Court. And I think the overall a lesson from this, the moral from this, if you like, is that there can't be justice delivered to the victims on the basis of injustice delivered to Pell. Now, the conclusion from this, and from what we've been able to see, is that this was a comprehensive failure. A failure by the Victorian police, who didn't do their job properly, conduct their investigations properly. It was a failure by the Victorian DPP, who continued with a flawed case. We had 2 jury trials and then an extraordinary 2-1 Victorian Court of Appeal decision against Pell, which has been comprehensively repudiated by the High Court. I think the point to make here, and I quoted the human rights lawyer, Father Frank Brennan, on this yesterday. He said he was raised in Queensland during the time of Bjelke-Petersen, when the Queensland criminal justice system was broken. He sees a similar problem with the Victorian criminal justice system. The final point I'd make about this is that you can have a broken down criminal justice system under a left-wing government, just as you can have one under a right-wing government. I think there's a lot of denialism about that particular point.
Before we move on to the coronavirus issue, because there's a lot I want to get your thoughts on that front, there's something that I want to get your reflections on, this notion that the Cardinal hasn't been declared innocent. What do you make of that suggestion that's been made in the wake of this unanimous High Court judgment?
Pure sophistry. Where's George Pell today? As far as I know, Kieran, he's no longer in jail. And anyone who wants to propound that argument should simply read the High Court decision. The High Court decision is comprehensive and it makes it very clear that on both counts it believes there was a significant probability that an innocent man was convicted. So we only need to rely on the words of the High Court. Beyond that, we've got what was said about the second incident in the minority judgment by Justice Mark Weinberg, when he made it absolutely clear that this second incident on which Pell was convicted was simply preposterous. It should never even have been brought to trial.
Paul, let's look at the coronavirus issue now, and there's been progress, cautious optimism from policymakers, from the Prime Minister down. What do you make of some of the pressure already to ease the social restrictions?
We had a very strong statement from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, at the end of the week, making the point that we may well see the virus die out in parts of regional Australia. This is good news. What's also good news is the very significant decline in the curve, as you pointed out earlier on in the program, Kieran, with the number of daily cases really significantly down. In this situation, there's no doubt that the government will be looking over coming months at how we move out of this situation, how we begin to free up the economy. But the point I would make about this is we need to be very careful. We've got a lot of pressure at the moment coming from commentators, from senior business figures, from sporting organisations such as the NRL, all of whom are implying that we can ease restrictions fairly significantly in the near future. These comments are absolutely irresponsible. They are contrary to the medical advice. Scott Morrison, Matthias Cormann, Greg Hunt and significantly the Shadow Health Minister Chris Bowen have all repudiated this. The worst mistake Scott Morrison could make now would be to prematurely ease these restrictions. We know that there can be a second wave of the virus. Witness China, witness Singapore. So I don't think Scott Morrison is going to be making the mistake anytime soon of prematurely easing these restrictions. We've got to devise the strategy, have the debate, but it would be folly to act too soon.
Absolutely. And Paul, finally, the Morrison response thus far, how do you mark it?
Well, he's done very well. The news poll at the start of last week showed this overwhelming support for the government's measures and very strong support for Scott Morrison over Anthony Albanese as the better Prime Minister. In his speech in Parliament this week, Morrison made it clear that the way he sees this, the essential takeout for him is this is about national sovereignty. It's not about socialism, it's about national sovereignty, and he'll use the national sovereignty framework as his guiding light when it comes to moving out of the virus, when it comes to rebuilding. I'll just make a final point about the Labor Party, because Labor said some significant things this week, Kieran. Labor wanted more money spent in terms of the stimulus, in terms of the JobKeeper package. And the Shadow Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, made it clear that it would be a mistake to ease the stimulus too early on. That's a very significant comment coming from Labor. And finally, he invoked Curtin and Chifley and post-war reconstruction in World War II. This is one of Labor's policy glories. And I think as this debate goes on, we'll see Labor talking more and more about post-war reconstruction and taking the lesson from that, applying it to the here and now. So Labor has got a framework in this debate.
Paul Kelly, as always, thank you.
Thanks, Kieran.